the great thing about Alabama and Georgia both playing in the SEC is that you can look at a lot of common opponents that each one has faced throughout the regular season.
You're speaking my language, not to cut you off, Andrew, but I actually took a lot of notes on that very thing, and I'm going to be producing a video to do exactly that. Go ahead.
Well, I hope I don't steal any of your thunder, but
go to it.
It's pretty striking, the statistics that Alabama and Georgia have put up against their common opponents, those being Arkansas, Auburn, Tennessee, and Florida. I think the talk around this game is going to be, can Georgia be tested by Alabama's offense? Because, Alabama has Bryce Young. They have talented wide receivers. And Georgia, of course, has one of the best defenses that we've seen in college football in many years. But looking at the same opponents that these teams have played, Georgia has 146 points for them against those opponents and 34 points against, which is an incredible 112-point differential. Alabama, on the other hand, scored 3 more total points than Georgia put up against those teams for 149, but they allowed 110 for a pitiful separation of 39 points. And if you take out the Tennessee game, the discrepancy is even worse. I'm not gonna say what the numbers are. I have them, but I want to take all the common opponents into account and not discount one just because it makes Georgia look a little bit better.
Yeah.
Georgia is going to destroy Alabama in the SEC championship game because while a lot of Alabama, I live in Mobile, Alabama, and I hear a lot of talk from Alabama fans about Georgia not being able to do it against Alabama for years. When both teams have come into a big game ranked, Alabama gets the best of them. And that is the talking point across the nation this week that I've heard so far. And that is exactly what I want the Georgia Bulldog football team to be hearing. People think that Alabama is going to come into the game and they're going to give Georgia their best shot. Wrong. Georgia is going to give Alabama their best shot. Alabama should be terrified of what is coming into Mercedes-Benz Stadium on Saturday. And Georgia is going to bury them in a shallow grave underneath Atlanta on the 4th. They have no chance. Georgia wants to erase the past so badly. They're not looking ahead to anybody. And I can promise you that as focused as Georgia is on winning the national championship, I would argue that they want the SEC championship victory against Alabama in particular as much, if not more, at this point than the national championship. Alabama is going to have Georgia's entire focus, and Georgia has been focused the entire season. This game is already over. It's going to be a 20-point victory for Georgia. I'm saying that the score is going to be 44-24 Georgia. You can book it. And anyone that thinks that this game is going to be closer has not been watching either team all season long. And that's all I got, Mark. It's great talking to you, and I hope you have a great rest of the week and enjoy these games coming up over the weekend. Take care.
Thank you so much for the call. Appreciate it. So I'm going to say a few things to both refute what he said, but mostly to agree with. There can be no refuting what he said in regards to what the performance has been by Alabama against those 4 teams, I believe. I believe it's 4 because they play 2 in each division. So it would be Arkansas, Auburn, Tennessee, and who else did Alabama play? Florida. Yeah. So, and I tend to look at the teams that are better as being the more valid comparison, but those 4 teams are roughly the same. Obviously, Florida slid off the table near the end of the year, but they're 4 mid-level teams in the SEC. And there's no comparison between Georgia's performance against those 4 and Alabama's. You can just look at it in any way, shape, or form. It's not even close. And I think he made a great statement about just, a few things came to mind here. Number one would be that there's no comparison between the metrics between the two teams against common opponents. And that's 4 decent quality opponents. I do go back to a 2018 matchup between Ohio State and Michigan, in which I lined up the common opponents between the two teams, and there was no comparison. Both teams came into the game at 10-1. Michigan played supremely better against all those common opponents than Ohio State did, and then Ohio State buried Michigan head-to-head. So there has been some precedent for that before. I do have a certain level of trust. Obviously, you would have to be a complete moron not to have a certain level of trust for Nick Saban and his coaching staff, because when has Nick Saban been blown out? Okay, I will answer that question because I was waiting for people to chime into the live chat. When has Nick Saban been blown out? I would expect the first answer for anyone to give to be the 2018 National Championship game against Clemson. Understandably so. 44-16, 4 touchdowns. That's a blowout. In the first quarter, it wasn't a blowout. Actually, Alabama had control of the game from a standpoint of they were the more dominant team. They led 16-14. They blew a chance at a touchdown. I won't go through all the statistics and the game scenarios, but basically the first half was close. Then Alabama got blown out. Other than that, that would be the one time that Nick Saban really in any game, not just important games. So Urban Meyer got blown out against Iowa, got blown out against Purdue, which would have been considered, those are throwaway games. Those aren't even necessarily big games for Ohio State, but they became big games once they lost them. Had they won them, it would have just been another win, another win, another win. So Nick Saban has not had those type of games. And on top of that, even against the best teams, has not been blown out. Obviously, he's rarely lost. So I will just point to the track record of Nick Saban not getting blown out. My next point, or what comes to mind in listening to the last caller, and I am the last person that is the, expert or amateur psychologist. I do not play that. I just am not the person that tries to guess who has psychological advantage over the other team, the other person. I read indicators just like everybody else. I read it in people's eyes. I read it on their faces. I read it in games. We could see a definite psychological warfare going on, Ohio State, Michigan in particular, in which it's easy to go into the game thinking, okay, there is a psychological factor here. And we saw it flip. But I'm not the one that tries to figure out, like you hear these sideline reporters during these games, and it's unbelievable how amazing they are at reading people's minds. I'm constantly fascinated at this. The sideline reporters telling us who's confident, who's not confident, who's worried, who's frustrated. Okay, it's a bit much. It's a football game. There are people that are mad and frustrated. It's an emotional sport. Okay. That being said, I kind of wonder the way Nick Saban has talked about this particular team in this season, because he tends to be hard on the teams that he knows are great. He tends to come down on them because he knows this is a great team. I can drive these guys and I'm going to squeeze the greatness out of them. Where when he's got a little bit of a lesser team, like this team, he tends to support them. If anything, he says after every game, when they get criticized for barely beating LSU, barely beating Auburn, barely beating Arkansas, what does he do? He comes to the defense of his team, talks about what great student athletes they are, that they work hard, they do all the right things, they're gamers, they showed a lot of resilience. When that's a great Alabama team and they barely get by those kind of opponents, what does he do? The standard's the standard. The process is the process. We failed here. We didn't do this well enough. We didn't do that well enough. Shoot, they win games by 40 points, and he lets them know and the media know, we didn't do this. We didn't do that. We're not good enough. We need to get better. But this team, he's propping up. Maybe I'm just reading into that. Again, I don't want to play amateur psychologist. That's the last thing I want to do. But that's the way it kind of hits me. And he did it again just the other day during his news conference in talking about his team. And he's lifting them up. He's trying to instill some confidence in them. All right, we got some great super chats coming in. Appreciate that so much. Travis Walker had one that had nothing attached to it, so I moved on. But Travis, thank you so much for the contribution. Don here says, Mark, the hardest working man on these YouTube streets. Thank you for that, Don. Appreciate that. We would like to go from being the hardest working to the best performing. That's the goal. When we can go from hardest working, and I appreciate everybody who tells me that I work hard. I'm glad that you notice that, recognize that, and appreciate that. But we want to take that from hardest working to best performing. So that's what we're working on with these channels. We want them to be the best performing. So that's our aim, goal, and mission, as we say all the time. Best discussion, debate, and analysis. Is that true all the time? Got to admit, not all the time, but that's the goal every day.